Juon the Curse and The Curse 2 are the lower budget, less popular older siblings of the Juon the Grudge films. Releasing straight to video a mere month apart at the start of the year 2000, it's no wonder why they are overshadowed by their later reboots, which both received theatrical releases. However, there would be no Grudge series if not for these first two movies, so they definitely deserve a lot of respect in that regard. The Curse crawled so the Grudge could run. The entire Juon franchise revolves around a curse that plagues a seemingly ordinary, unsuspecting house in a Japanese suburb where an act of gruesome, violent murder occurred. However, the essence of death stuck to that residence, festering and continuing to indiscriminately infect all those who enter. The stories of these unfortunate people are usually told in these films in a non-linear fashion, which is somewhat jarring at first, but once you realise what's going on, you can piece together the story in its correct chronological order. It encourages the viewer to pay closer attention, making the films very rewatchable and unique experiences amongst the many other J-horror films sprouting up around the time. Just a quick warning, I'll be spoiling these films in their entirety by going through them with a fine comb. However, like with a comb, I'll be extracting only the parts vital to the story, leaving those I deem unimportant unmentioned, so as to not completely ruin the experience of anyone who wants to watch them afterwards. I think that metaphor works. Therefore, if you want to have a totally fresh experience with the films, I recommend saving this video for after. Otherwise, please enjoy this journey through the first two feature films in the Juon franchise. The Curse is split into 6 segments, each following a key part of a certain character's encounter with the curse. The splitting up of the movie into chapters is also a staple of the Juon series and helps to make the non-linear storytelling more digestible. The first segment centers around a boy called Toshio, although we mainly follow Toshio's school teacher, Mr. Kobayashi. As Kobayashi comes home to his pregnant wife, he tries calling the Saiki residence because Toshio hasn't been attending school, but nobody picks up. A detail I liked here is that both Kobayashi and his wife Manami knew Toshio's mother, Kayako, from their time in university, and Manami comments on how strange she was. We next see Kobayashi making a house call to the Saikis, but only finds Toshio idly dangling his arms out of the bathroom window. When Toshio falls out of sight, Kobayashi lets himself into the house to help him. Sitting him down in the messy sitting room, he notices the small cuts and bruises covering Toshio's body and becomes worried. He gets up to look out the window, and as he does so, the shot shows Toshio glaring at Kobayashi from behind and letting out an otherworldly cat's meow. The cries cut abruptly and Toshio's segment ends. The second segment follows Yuki, who's working as a tutor for a high school girl called Kana. Kana's mother notifies them that she's going out grocery shopping, and as she leaves we see that they're currently living in the house previously owned by the Saikis. It's pretty clear that Yuki doesn't like cats as she turns all of Kana's plushies away from her. Not only is she disturbed by these cats, but also an unnerving noise that only she can hear. Kana suddenly remembers her duty to feed the school rabbit, so she runs off, leaving Yuki alone in her room. Here, when she's alone, is when we, the audience, begin to hear the noise that was making her so uncomfortable. It's a strange, dry croak, unlike anything in the natural world. She leaves the room in an attempt to escape the noise, but a black cat in the unusually dark hallway scares her into the closet. The croak persists, its source coming from the attic above her. She stands up to investigate and is confronted by the terrifying spirit of Kayako, who swiftly drags her up into the attic, silencing her screams. The next segment follows Mizuho, who is mentioned by Kana as she left for her rabbit feeding duties. She arrives at the school in the evening to look for her boyfriend, Tsuyoshi, who is Kana's brother. She finds his phone on the ground beside his bike outside the front entrance and calls his mother to ask if she's seen him. It seems she hasn't. A staff member escorts her to the teacher's office where she is told to wait while they go to look for Tsuyoshi within the school grounds. While she waits, Mizuho begins to experience strange happenings such as flickering lights and a couple of encounters with a mischievous little boy. She gets a call on Tsuyoshi's phone from the number 444444444, I think that's right, which is not only a nice reference to a previous Juon short film, but is also an incredibly bad omen, since the number 4 is considered unlucky in Japanese culture due to its pronunciation being similar to that of the word for death. She answers the phone, for some reason, and hears a cat meowing, then looks down to see Toshio by her side, also meowing. Kana's segment begins with 2 detectives joining a coroner in a morgue where a concealed body lies on the table. He informs them that the autopsy found her body to be completely broken and disfigured, as well as including pieces of rabbit and a human jaw inside. Another detective enters to present photos of the people seen to be near the rabbit enclosure that day, Kana and her classmate Hisai. A subtle clue as to who the body is and who the jaw belongs to lies within the glance the detective gives to the dismembered jaw as he says Kana's name. We then see Kana's mother returning from her trip to the store. She gets the call from Mizuho at school, and as they talk, a bloody figure stumbles up the stairs behind her. She follows it, thinking it's Yoshi, and sees pools of blood splattered on the steps. The figure continues out of sight, and she pursues it cautiously. Turning the corner, she sees a blood-soaked girl climbing the steps ahead of her. She asks who it is, hoping she doesn't recognize her, and Kana turns to reveal her jawless face. A grotesque visual that still remains in my mind as I write this. It also doesn't help that I have to keep rewatching the footage while editing either. Kayako's segment returns to Kobayashi taking care of Toshio in the empty Saiki house. He finds the tattered remains of a photo among the rubbish scattered across the ground and begins piecing it together. It depicts the Saiki family, albeit with Kayako's face torn out. A cat begins meowing somewhere in the house, and Kobayashi follows it to the bathroom that Toshio was seen dangling his hands out of earlier. He gets a vision of a pair of hands covered in blood and fur, with the blurred remains of a black cat lying below them. Startled by this, he returns to the sitting room to find that Toshio has gone missing. As he searches the house, he hears Toshio and his mother talking in an upstairs room. Although the complete translation wasn't included in this version of the film that I watched, the two talk about how Toshio's father killed his mother and has since disappeared. Kobayashi enters the room to see Toshio alone, drawing disturbing depictions of cats, some of which coloured in black and red. As he questions Toshio, Kayako's disembodied voice calls him from the hall. He checks, but she's nowhere to be found until an opening door invites him into the room where Yuki went missing in an earlier segment. A slow, droning chant seeps into the soundscape as he discovers a diary left by Kayako with pages upon pages filled with increasingly manic entries dedicated to him. Kayako kept a record of every perceived interaction with Kobayashi for years. She detailed his reading and drinking habits, noting how she escorted him home after he drank too much and watched him as he slept. It grows more disturbing still as he turns the pages to find a group photo with his face scratched out. It seems that at some point her opinion of him changed to something much more sinister. He puts the diary down, wanting to read no further. As he turns to leave, the loud buzzing of a fly somehow lures him to the closet. There he finds Kayako's lifeless body sitting in the darkness. He grabs Toshio and tries to flee the house, but stops to receive a phone call for some reason. The call is from Takeo Saiki, Kayako's husband. Takeo believes Toshio to be Kobayashi's child and tells him to take care of him from now on. He also notifies Kobayashi of his child's premature birth. The shot changes to show Takeo standing in a phone booth with blood smeared all across its glass walls. He holds the lifeless fetus in his hands and laughs at Kobayashi down the receiver. The call ends. Kobayashi collapses and Takeo exits the phone booth with a bloody bag in hand. Now, just as we, the audience, are recovering from this shocking twist, the film begins its most iconic scene. Toshio picks up Kobayashi's phone and begins conversing with his mother, all the while looking towards the upper floor. Kobayashi confusingly looks at Toshio, who is now standing with his mouth agape, breathing an unnaturally long breath. A crash is heard from upstairs and the sound of dragging attracts Kobayashi's attention. Something's coming. Kobayashi looks to the bend in the staircase where the monstrous shape of Kayako slowly descends, crawling face first. Her broken bones buckle as she smears her way towards him. A death rattle forces its way out of her vengeful facial expression while her gross, rubbery limbs twist inside the blood-stained plastic bag that she's wrapped in. Looks of longing desire mixed with pure hatred on her pale blue face. Kobayashi tries to push himself away from the horror that draws ever closer to him. He reaches the exit as her hands stain the landing floor. The door opens behind him. He looks up and sees Kayako standing above him. Then, after a moment, she descends upon his petrified face. This is the last we see of Kobayashi. We then see Takeo stumbling his way through the quiet streets, thrashing the bag as he goes. He falls into a pile of trash bags and scuttles away from it, scared. One of the bags begins moving towards him, and the ghostly hand of Kayako pokes its way out and reaches towards him. This is also the last we see of Takeo. Kayako has finally gotten revenge on the two men that wronged her, but she won't stop there. Side note, even though during this very intense scene, you can clearly spot a couple walking down the road in the background. You'd expect that to ruin the scene and would require a reshoot, but I think it intentionally shows how unnoticeable this curse is to the rest of the world. The final segment begins, taking place after all of the previous ones. Kyoko, a medium, is asked by her brother to check out a property that won't sell because of its dark past. As they approach the house, she instantly gets bad vibes from it, but still enters, albeit apprehensively. She witnesses the spine-chilling manifestation of Kayako and enters the room where her body was found. Sensing the horribly malevolent energy that dwells here, she asks for some sake from downstairs and drinks it to test the house's spiritual energy. Apparently, the sake reacts to the presence of spirits, and if someone drinks it and it tastes bad to them, they should not live there because the house is too dangerous for them. But if it tastes fine, then they're okay to live there. Kayako makes her brother promise to have people drink this when they view the house before running out the door. She soon gets news that he's sold the house. He had the family try the sake, and it somehow tasted fine to them, but then asks if she can come over to check out his son, who's been acting strange recently. As she walks home, she takes a detour past the newly sold house and sees the wife standing by the window, looking out of it with an odd, distant stare. It seems the sake didn't work. And that's where it ends. A great cliffhanger that I'm sure made viewers glad they'd be getting a sequel so soon after this film. It's amazing how good the horror elements were in this since it had such a low budget. It proves that you don't need to spend millions on special effects to create an effective horror experience. This is especially evident in Kayako's design. Her blood-smeared, cold blue body wrapped in clear plastic bags is so simple yet works so well with her broken movements and stomach-churning sound effects. The story is also incredibly well crafted, and the non-linear method of storytelling really emphasizes the strange, disjointed nature of the film and its subjects. Even though the segments are out of order, they flow smoothly into each other, building up suspense and dread throughout until it all culminates in Kayako's segment. It also leads into the sequel well, with the last segment functioning as a bridge between the two. The camera work is masterful in this film. It lingers on shots just a little longer than usual to create brief moments of suspense and panic in your mind. Thoughts suddenly start racing through your head like, is something gonna happen? Is there something I'm not seeing? It's a simple way of making the viewer more uncomfortable. The geometry of the house is also used well. Lots of high shots in the entrance make the most of the staircase's verticality, and it really feels like there's someone watching from above. I love how the staircase is used in this film, especially in the Kana jaw scene. The mother stands in the light before the corner, which separates her from the dark, devastating reality of the bloody, deformed Kana ascending the steps. It's such a simple yet wonderfully composed shot, and it's just one example of such in the film. While the cinematography itself is amazing, the lighting in many shots did feel a bit flat, which on one hand I thought lessened the impact of some of the scares, but on the other hand I feel like the film wasn't trying to go for non-stop jump scares. The frightful moments are very much subdued and slow, and the music and soundscape that accompany those moments reflect that, sometimes omitting sound entirely to bring all the focus to the shocking visuals. And with all that said, let's see what The Curse 2 has to offer. The sequel is also split into 6 segments, but doesn't follow a non-linear structure like the first film. The first 2 segments are also just reused footage from the first film, which I find strange because of the short amount of time between the releases of the 2 films. It's not like anyone needed a reminder. That, and it's just generally an odd choice. This 30 out of a total of 70 minutes is dedicated to re-showing Kayako and Kyoko's segments. Kayako's plays out exactly the same, but Kyoko's has a bit of extra footage mixed in before moving on to the brand new stuff where the last movie ended. The one new scene is of Kyoko's nephew, Nobuyuki, who was previously mentioned to be acting strangely, sitting alone in a dark room watching a horror movie. The image on the screen cuts to static and he moves closer to inspect it. He is then frightened by something on the screen and backs away. As he sits there stunned, a ghostly hand reaches up to his shoulder from behind. Then, in another weird artistic choice, the film also cuts to static in a fourth wall breaking way, which I wasn't fond of. After this, we return to the reused footage of the final scene in the first film. However, we get a continuation from it and watch as Kayako flees from the newly bought house and calls someone to get info on it. Her informant clues her into the dark history of the property, but jokingly reassures her that she won't die as well. She drops by her brother Tatsuya's office to deliver the files she got from the informant and asks for his new address since he isn't there. She arrives at his place to find the door unlocked and the apartment seemingly empty. Something strange has happened here. TV static lures her to the living room where she finds Nobuyuki, dazed and unresponsive. Frantic rapping at the front door pulls her away from him, and a concerned neighbor asks about the screams of a baby that she just heard from this apartment. But there is no baby here. Kayako dismisses her and returns to Nobu. Tatsuya is at his office, reading through the files Kayako brought by. It's revealed that the murder of Manami Kobayashi and her unborn daughter took place in the very apartment he just moved into. Kayako opens the sliding doors in front of Nobu and gets a vision of Takeo Saiki tearing the baby out of the pregnant Manami and passes out from shock. Tatsuya's segment begins with Hiromi, the wife of the couple that recently moved into the Saiki house, receiving a package from a mysterious source. Inside she finds Toshio's family drawings and Kayako's diary. Her eyes widen as she is assumedly possessed. Quietly returning to the kitchen where her husband is eating breakfast, she finishes serving the half-cooked eggs before striking him across the back of the head with the frying pan. She sits back down and continues her meal while his body twitches on the ground beside her. We cut to Tatsuya at his parents' house, watching his mother and son staring into an adjoining room. Kyoko sits inside it, left in a catatonic state from the vision. Tatsuya explains what he knows of the situation to his parents. His father reveals that he too possesses the ability to see spirits and therefore understands the severity and helplessness of the situation. He urges Tatsuya to do something about his apartment or he too will be next. Tatsuya then visits the resold Saiki house and is greeted by Hiromi. While he waits for his tea, he notices Toshio's drawings and recognizes the name. As the two chat, Hiromi glances off to the side just as a cat meows, but there is no cat. He asks about the drawing and she says her child drew it, but she has no child. Hiromi begins to act strange and slumps over in her seat. We return to the parents' house and the mother is laughing deliriously. The father is drawn to a different room by a cat's meow, and when he opens the door he is struck by the sight of Toshio's head sticking out of the ground, meowing innocently. He crawls to the hallway where his wife collapses and Kyoko sits, cradling a toy doll. Back to Tatsuya again. As he turns to leave, he picks up Kayako's diary. Hiromi claims that it's hers and stands up to face him. Then the camera swerves around to reveal Toshio sitting on the couch behind Hiromi. Tatsuya's legs give out and she moves towards him, pushing her ghostly face to his. The next scene shows the petrified bodies of Tatsuya's parents scattered throughout the house. Kyoko continues to sit, cradling the doll in the darkness, rocking back and forth with increasing ferocity. Nobu stands up, walks through the house, past his dead grandparents, and sits himself in the moonlight seeping through the windows. He may not be dead, but he certainly doesn't seem alive. Cameo's segment begins. Two of the three detectives from the first film, including Cameo, arrive at the house of the lead detective, Yoshikawa. It seems he's been absent from work lately and they grew worried. Yoshikawa's wife dismisses them, claiming that her husband is just sick, but as they walk towards the rear of the house, they see their colleague sitting on the porch, absent-mindedly staring off into space and muttering nonsensical things. It appears he is indeed sick, but not of the body, instead of the mind. Yoshikawa turns and upon noticing them, he becomes distraught and is ushered inside by his wife. From his erratic reaction to his fellow detectives, it's clear he came in contact with something he shouldn't have while investigating the cases of missing persons from the first film, and the sight of them brought back the fracturing memories of those horrors. We next see Cameo and his younger detective partner Izuka following Nobuyuki on his way home. A month has passed since the incident with Nobu's family and the detectives are still struggling to understand the situation. At the police station, Cameo shows Izuka two photos of Hiromi that Yoshikawa took while surveying the house. The first photo is from before she moved into the house, while the second photo shows her looking out of one of the windows and more closely resembling the appearance of a previous resident, Kayako Saiki. He then burns the photo, exclaiming he wants to wash his hands of the case and advises Izuka to do the same. We briefly cut back to Yoshikawa as his wife attempts to wake him up from a nap. She is taken aback by a black mass that spreads from the shadows in the room. The mass then takes the form of Kayako's face and the woman falls silent. Back at the station, Izuka is told by a police officer that he has a visitor, but the visitor is Kayako Saiki, which is impossible. At this moment we see Kayako enter the room behind them that Cameo was seen to enter just moments before. Cameo erupts out of the room in a panic. Izuka enters to investigate and the woman tries to calm Cameo down. She then enters the room after Izuka and the two of them are never heard from again. Out in the hallway, Cameo begins to regain his composure, but as he looks down to his feet, Kayako pops out from between his legs. Nobuyuki's segment starts with a group of teens cleaning their classroom after school. The group start to argue and the attention switches to Nobu, who is standing to the side looking out of the window. He glances back at them with a deadpan expression, creeping them out. We then see what he was looking at outside, Kayako. Suddenly, a hand stretches up from below the second-story window and slides it open. Kayako fumbles in and falls to the floor. She begins crawling towards him. He escapes to the hallway, but she cuts him off, chasing after him on all fours like some kind of animal. Also, the school is mysteriously completely empty now, except for Nobu and his pursuer. Kayako continues to flank him, popping out from around corners as he approaches them. But wait, there's two Kayakos? No, there's dozens of Kayakos? A group of them scratches at the classroom window as another cradles Nobu in the corner. A shot shows many other Kayakos standing, swaying outside in the rain, sounding out a chorus of death rattles. What the fuck did I just watch? Anyway, Saori's segment begins, but all we see is the outside of the Saiki house. Several teen girls have snuck in to explore its empty, lifeless rooms. One of them jokingly takes a swig of some sake she found lying around. It tastes bad. They hear Kayako's croak, then Toshio's meow, and the film ends. The Curse 2 was undoubtedly an extremely disappointing sequel to me. The continuation of the story was actually handled fairly well, but every other aspect of the film was a serious letdown. The fact that it's only really half a movie as well doesn't help with that opinion. In a way, I get it. The reason for the 30-minute recap at the start was so the audience knew exactly what was going on, since only the footage vital to the sequel's story was reused. But if your sequel doesn't work without wasting half its time re-showing footage from the first film, then it shouldn't exist as a sequel. This story should have been condensed into a single 2-hour-long film instead of two 70-minute films. I also don't understand the total abandonment of the unique non-linear storytelling method that was present in the first film. It really feels like all the effort was put into The Curse, and The Curse 2 was just an afterthought. Either that, or they were forced to split the footage between two films due to financial issues, or something. I really don't get it. The first film was like a ray of sunshine, but the second feels more like the ray of light is actually the fiery wreckage of a plane rapidly descending through the clouds towards me, and the scares were honestly terrible. There wasn't one actually scary moment in this that wasn't imported from the first film. The original ones in this sequel all teetered between amateuristic awkwardness and incompetent goofiness. Kayako's ceiling face, her Jack-in-the-Box's chair scare, and of course whatever the fuck that ending was. All terrible, especially compared to the moments in the first film, like Kana ascending the stairs, Kayako descending the stairs, and all the quietly terrifying moments throughout. It's difficult to even consider these two movies as part of the same franchise, let alone being directly connected. The second film lacks nearly everything that the first film did right. All that beautifully subtle horror, the interesting storytelling techniques, the very essence of the original. The camera work was just as good as it was in the first film, I guess, although less noticeable without more interesting moments to capture with it. And regarding that bizarre ending, it seems like they were trying to depict the curse in a physical sense, that Kayako could possess other women with her intentions and eventually overtake their physical appearance as well, which would sort of explain the abundance of Kayakos that flooded the school, if we assume that they were all originally individual victims of Kayako's possession. However, while I understand that aspect of the curse as much as one can, I don't think the theme of motherhood that's sprinkled throughout was integrated as effectively. The Kayakos all chase after Nobu and cradle him instead of snapping him in half like the other victims, and when Hirumi and Kyoko became possessed, they both had an obsession with children. But I don't know why this was the case, because Kayako didn't long for a child, she already had Toshio. Or maybe she wanted to conceive a child with Kobayashi instead of Takeo, and that's the cause of the obsession. I'm not sure. One thing both films did manage to communicate effectively though was how dangerous and contagious this curse is. You see it spread from the unlucky people who enter the house to their loved ones or just people they have frequent contact with. Nobody is safe from it, and it claims many lives. Yet interestingly, it all gets forgotten about. The news of the deaths is soon lost in a sea of neighbourhood gossip and rumours. The horror settles down, hibernating until its next unknowing victim arrives. So that's Juon the Curse 1 and 2. A pretty good lesson on how to and how not to execute effective horror, which regardless of its supernatural nature feels realistic, at least in the first film anyway. These films don't present the events of the story as something fantastical. They feel very much real, the type of horror that takes place in an unsuspecting house down the road from you. The unnoticed horror that exists everywhere, but due to it not being flashy and dramatic like a serial killer roaming the streets killing dozens of teenagers, doesn't make news headlines, instead is relegated to the quiet rear pages of the daily newspaper. It should be noted as well that a lot of the scenes in these films take place during daytime, contrasting the usual dark settings you would usually encounter scary things. It shows that ordinary settings can hold intense horrors within them too, and that's a very scary thought. If I were to recommend watching these films, it'd come with the advice to completely skip the last 30 minutes of the first film and go straight into the second, since the second includes the first film's final 30 minutes in its first 30 minutes, along with some bonus footage of Nobuyuki. However, if you just want to not watch the second film, that's fine too, because I don't think it's really worth watching. Please let me know what you thought of this video, as I'm not sure if this over-analytical approach to films works in videos, and I'd like to know before I continue this series. Other than that, thanks for watching.